Jetzt steht eine Keynote am Programm. Wir sind ein bisschen aufgeregt, weil wir tatsächlich jetzt live nach Afrika schalten werden. Wir haben das in der Früh probiert. Es hat mehr oder weniger funktioniert, sage ich mal, aber wir probieren es jetzt mal. Und zwar steht jetzt eine Keynote am Programm von Dr. Abdu MUKHTAR, Director of Industry and Trade Development der Afrikanischen Entwicklungsbank. Ein ganz, ganz spannender Gast und dazu schalten wir jetzt, wie gesagt, live nach Afrika, nach Abidjan. Mr. MUKHTAR, can you hear me? Dazu schalten wir jetzt, wie gesagt, live nach Afrika, nach Abidjan. Mr. MUKHTAR, can you hear me? Ich merke gerade, wir haben, glaube ich, ein bisschen ein Delay.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
So good to hear you.
Greetings.
Ich merke gerade, wir haben, glaube ich, ein bisschen ein Delay.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Morning, everyone.
We're looking forward to your keynote. If you could please start, Mr. MUKHTAR. Thank you. We're looking forward
Good
to
morning,
your
everyone.
keynote. If you could
Greetings
please
from
start,
Abidjan,
Mr.
Cote d'Ivoire,
MUKHTAR.
on behalf of the
Thank you.
African Development Bank. My name is Abdu MUKHTAR. I'm the director of the Industrial and Trade Development Department. I want to apologize for not being with you physically for this important dialogue, but we appreciate, the invitation, and we believe that this is really an interesting dialogue to have. Let me begin by giving a shout out to our advisor for Austria in the African Development Bank, Judy Smith, for all the excellent work she's doing in fostering relationship between the bank, Austria, and the African continent. Also a special shout out to Martin Wula, the regional director for Africa and the Middle East, for your organization, for all the things that he's been doing to get this going. So what I will do in the next few minutes that I have to give this keynote is really just to give a context of development on the African continent, talk about what the African Development Bank is doing, what role we're playing in ensuring that, and then also end by just talking about the relationship between Africa, but more importantly, the African Development Bank and Austria, and the Austrian business community, and then highlight a few opportunities that I see for investors from Austria. I want to apologize up front if I repeat some of the important points that have been made already. I've not been able to hear the earlier part of the session, so I may repeat some of the things that have already been announced by some of the experts that have already spoken. Let me start by a challenge, just to give you some basic numbers and statistics on Africa in general, just to set the context up front. You can look at this in two ways. You can see this as big problems, or you can see them as challenges and opportunities to explore. Is up to you. And I think that what we like to say, especially since the business community, if you're in business, no matter where you are in the world, if you're in business, if you're not in Africa, then you are not in business. That's what we like to say. And I think that just organizing this two-day session shows how important that you've taken this message to. So first, Africa, 1.3 billion people, 54 countries. This 1.4 billion is growing. Africa is expected to surpass the total population of India and China by the year 2050. The population is young. 60% of the population is less than 25 years old. 60% of the world's remaining arable land, good land for agriculture, is actually in Africa. There's increasing urbanization. 60% of the people living in cities, and more people are moving into the cities. Climate change, is creating a lot of problems, even though Africa contributes maybe less than 1% to the global emissions, but we actually bear a big burden and brunt of the problem and the consequences of climate change. We see increasing political stability over the last several years, despite some hiccups here and there in a few countries. Infrastructure is a big problem, a huge gap in infrastructure. We estimate in the African Development Bank that Africa needs between 80 to $100 billion annually to fill in the infrastructure gap. And consumer spending is growing. Right now, $2.5 trillion of consumer spending expected by 2030 to reach $4 trillion. So you can see this, I just put all of this combination of challenges, problems, but again, do you want to see the glass half full, or do you want to see the glass half empty? For us in the African Development Bank, we see this as huge opportunities for private sector, for development and for economic progress. The private sector in Africa accounts for 90% of the working population on the continent. 80% of total production is done by the private sector, and 67% of the total investment on the continent is from the private sector. So the private sector is very, very dominant, especially at SME level. Small and medium enterprises, play an absolute key role. Over 90% of businesses in Africa are SMEs. So again, this is a big opportunity for business. Let me address the elephant in the room. COVID-19, obviously, like all parts of the world, has not spared Africa economically and socially speaking. It has had negative impact on economic growth. Prior to 2020, real GDP growth was like 4.6%. 6 out of 10 fastest growing countries in the world were in Africa before 2020. We had projected 5.8% GDP growth. We ended up with a minus 2.1%. That created the worst recession on the continent in 50 years. Cumulatively, Africa lost almost $150 billion of GDP to the COVID pandemic. 30 million jobs were lost, and 30 million people were unfortunately pushed into extreme poverty. So that is what COVID has done, on top of all the other challenges that we've been having. But things are looking up. We've seen increasing the light at the end of the tunnel. We expect a rebound. In the bank, we're projecting 3.4% growth for 2021 and 4.6% growth for 2022. But get this straight, this recovery, this positive trend that we see will not be achieved without vaccine security. Lives and livelihoods in Africa cannot be fully restored without equitable access to vaccines. Right now, less than 10% of African population is fully vaccinated. This compares to, of course, 45% globally, 80% in Europe and the United and Northern America, and 60% in Africa, in South America and Asia. So this is the context. A lot of challenges, problems ahead that can be resolved if we do the right things. But more importantly, I think that there are a lot of opportunities when you look at all of this context. So let me switch now to the African Development Bank and what we do. Established in 1964, we have about 81 member countries, 54, all the 54 African countries, and 27 non-regional countries, including Austria. Austria is an important member of the bank, and I will talk about that towards the end of my speech. Our mission is to ensure the economic and social development of our regional member countries. We have, in 2019, we doubled our capital. We did a general capital increase, so now we have a capital base of about $200 billion, which is enough money to do a lot of things. In 2016, we looked at our strategy and said, what are the key things that we need to do? And we identified 5 key areas that we call the high fives, as in give me a high five. So the first priority area is to integrate Africa. And the reason for this is, if you look at it, Africa is heavily fragmented, 54 countries, 22 of which are landlocked. Multiple trade zones, at least 16 trade zones exist on the continent. The average distance from between major cities in Africa is almost 4,000 kilometers compared to like 1,200 kilometers in Europe. Multiple logistic fragmentation and so on. So we realize there is absolute need to integrate Africa, bring countries together, ensure free movements of goods and people and services and so on and so forth, to bring about economic development. The second high five priority area is to industrialize Africa. Again, when you look at it, right now Africa accounts for only 2% of global output, manufacturing output. We don't add value to many of our products. 60% of the cocoa that is produced in the world comes from just a few African countries, but we don't produce chocolates. And if you look at it from a pricing perspective, commodity prices will continue to fluctuate, even go down the road, but the cost price of chocolates will not do that. We produce a lot of cocoa beans. We don't produce coffee. We produce a lot of cotton. We don't produce textile and garments. So there is an absolute need to produce, to add value to products, to industrialize, but more importantly, in the process to create jobs that are much needed on the continent. The third priority is to feed Africa. So this is really focused on agriculture. Right now, Africa imports, in 2019, we imported about $43 billion worth of food. You know, a continent of $1.3 billion is not able to feed itself completely. We still need to import food. And this number is expected to rise to $110 billion by 2025 if we don't take the necessary measures. So there's an absolute need to focus on agriculture. The fourth priority area for the bank and for the continent is to power Africa, provide energy. If you look at it, you know, right now in Africa, we have 600 million people who don't have access to electricity. This is about 2/3 of the global population of, without power. So of all the people on the planet that have no access to electricity, 2/3 are in Africa. With a population of $1.3 billion, our installed capacity for power is just 147 gigawatts. Compare that to Austria, your country, where with a population of less than 10 million, about 9 million or so, you produce, you know, 21 gigawatts. So it's just like 7 times less, you know, so we produce only 7 times, but with a population of 1.3 billion, you can see the deficit. Africa produces the same amount of power that's produced in Africa. It's about what is produced in Spain. Spain, you know, is a population, of course, of 47 million, less than 50 million, but Africa was 1.3 billion people. So you can understand the huge deficit. That's why it's important to focus on providing power as a key element of infrastructure. The last high five is improving the quality of life. So that's focus on human capital development, health, education, water, sanitation. We've estimated, the UNDP has estimated that just focusing on these high fives will achieve 90% of the sustainable development goals. So if Africa only just focuses on these high five priorities that have been identified by the bank, we will achieve 90% of the SDGs by the year 2030. So what are some of the things that we've been doing in this area? One, and I'll just randomly just, you know, given what I perceive as the interest of the members of this group, but we'll be happy to continue the discussions. With COVID, quickly, when COVID hit in 2020, the bank, we quickly established a $10 billion facility that we call COVID Rapid Response Facility to help stabilize economies, healthcare systems across the continent, and provide, you know, the support, emergency support that countries needed. So that was $10 billion in 2020. That was really helpful and really helped kept, you know, many of our countries afloat and above, you know, to at least be able to maintain some stability. We also floated a social bond, a $3 billion bond that we floated on international stock markets, which really is the largest at that time social bond, just again to create opportunities in the healthcare services and industry. Second area that the bank is very active in is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. As you know, this is a game changer for the African continent. This is the largest single trade zone since the establishment of the World Trade Organization, bringing about 1.3 billion people, 3.3 trillion of GDP, all combined. You know, so this will, the CFTA will address this issue of fragmentation and help bring about integration that I mentioned earlier. In this regards, in the next 2 years, we expect to spend about $2 billion in CFTA-related activities, basically to integrate, you know, through infrastructure, through trade finance, through activities and programs to remove non-tariff barriers across, but more importantly, to help countries identify their comparative advantages for production and see where they can plug into various value chains. Right now, intra-Africa trade is about 15%. So we only trade within Africa at 15% compared to Europe, almost 68%, 60% in Asia. So there is a need, and we believe that the CFTA will bring about this transformation and increase intra-Africa trade. You have a huge market, 1.3 billion. You know, you absolutely should, you know, find a way to trade internally as well as externally. In the power sector, I mentioned the problems. Since 2016, we've pivoted into clean and renewable energy investments, and 85% of our investments in the energy sector so far in that regard, clean energy. So we spent $7.2 billion in the last 5 years in energy and power projects. The goal is to increase power generation by 3 gigawatts. We've done a lot of solar projects, hydro projects in Cameroon. We're doing the Inga Dam, Gabon. So many countries in Africa. We're doing a lot of solar and hydro projects and wind also to some extent. I would like to highlight a major initiative in the power sector that we call Desert to Power, which will be very, very transformative. This is a 20 billion program that we're doing to create the largest solar zone in Africa, probably in the whole world. Will generate 10,000 megawatts of power to service 250 million Africans, mostly in the Sahel area, across 11 countries. So this is absolutely huge, and we really are proud of this program. We create, again, this enormous opportunity. In the rail sector, we're doing, again, when you talk about infrastructure, we talk about improving trade, you need the rail system to work. Right now, the rail system in Africa is under-penetrated, just 2.8 kilometers of rail per 1,000 kilometers. So that's the density. Average in the world is 23 kilometers per 1,000. So we're really just basically 10% in terms of penetration. We have committed in the last several years in the bank $16 billion in transport infrastructure. About $2 billion is in rail system. So this includes a major program that we've done in Nakala, $300 million between Mozambique and Malawi. Moving on, in the water and facility water sanitation, we created what we call the African Water Facility to ensure water security in Africa and to create the Africa Water Vision. This is $176 million, of which Austrian government is a major contributor. We've done work in the pharmaceutical sector. We're planning to spend about $3 billion over the next 10 years in pharmaceutical sectors to essentially increase local manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. Right now, Africa produces only 30% of the drugs that we consume, so we import 70%. The plan is by 2030 we'll reverse that so that we can domesticate the local production 70%. Of course, that calls for increased spending and supporting of manufacturers, local manufacturers, global manufacturers in Austria, in other places that are willing to come and set up shop on the continent will be welcome and will be supported. That will call for increase in R&D spending, quality control standards, but also, the overall health infrastructure to produce, medical equipment and so on the planet. We're also doing work in ICT sector. So the fourth industrial revolution is one area where we really playing a key role, and we're looking to see what we can do to support the continent. Let me conclude by saying, again, Austria, has been a member of the bank for 38 years. All the programs in Austria's program for development policy are aligned with our high fives. Austria has paid up all its subscriptions, almost is a member about 1.8 billion of subscription in the bank, has paid off all the called up capital. So we cherish our friendship with Austria. We feel that there's a lot of opportunities for the private sector in Austria in the sectors that I've mentioned. And we call on you to establish your presence on the continent through establishing partnerships, through local presence. But please reach out to the African Development Bank. We'll be happy to partner with you and your institutions to continue the support and the great work that we are doing for the African continent. And I thank you again for this. And of course, reach out to Judith again, Schmidl, the advisor, who's been doing an excellent job. And we will be happy to work with her to see how we can increase Austrian presence on the African continent. Thank you very much.
Awesome, Mr. MUKHTAR, thank you so much for this exciting keynote. All the best for you and best regards from Vienna. Thank you.